This program is made possible in part by the Moving Image Trust Fund.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. Dr. Bill Schwab is a former Dean of Arts and Sciences at the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville and a professor of sociology. Also, he is the professor of Right to Dream, a new book that deals with the DREAM Act, why its author believes it is essential not only to the future of Arkansas, but to the future of the country as well. Dr. Bill Schwab, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Why you? Why this issue? Why now? The now, I guess, is
right.
very
the issue is because as a professor and as a dean, I have worked with these students over the years. And they're remarkable young people. And they find themselves in this cruel situation, which is not of their making.
We're a bit ahead of ourselves. I guess, Bill, that we should start by saying, what students are we talking about? These are
children of people that came to the United States unauthorized. And most of the young, undocumented students that I deal with arrived here at a very, very young age, sometimes as infants, 3, 4, 5 years of age. They've gone to our public schools. They've been raised in our neighborhoods. They've played on our sports teams. They speak English as their first language. And the vast majority of the ones that I work with, you could not tell that they're not Americans. The only difference is that they don't have the right immigration status. So watching them being pushed into the shadows, knowing that the odds they're going to be deported are minuscule, realizing that they're going to be living their entire adult lives here, I took it on myself to do something about it, and my contribution as an academic is to try to look at this issue through the eyes of social science.
The immediate issue that's addressed in DREAM is, or at least in the context of our conversation, should these young people be allowed to attend university and pay the in-state, or this is a major part of the issue, pay in-state rates for tuition? Should even be in the country, period, is a larger question that so many would ask. But your concern, one of your concerns is that we are freezing out, we're making impossible higher education in the country where they were raised for financial reasons because of their immigration status.
Well, put things in context. We had 19 students who were attending the University of Arkansas when the Arkansas Department of Higher Education required them to have a Social Security number. Up to then, students simply had to have graduated from an Arkansas high school. Their tuition went up $9,000. Now, Dave Gerhardt was able to find private donors who provided that difference for these 19 students.
Chancellor Gerhardt.
Chancellor Gerhardt. And we were able to get them to graduation. But we simply could not afford as an institution to support the large increase in Hispanic students coming to the university. So I think when you work with these students and you have an entire family struggling to have them take one course per semester, we see, I think, clearly how their educational opportunities are being constrained. And their talents and their skills, which we sorely need in the state of Arkansas, are being squandered. That's my position on the DREAM Act in Arkansas.
The devil's advocate. Opponents say, that sounds good, and we certainly have a great deal of sympathy for these young people and their families, but they are undocumented. In a word, they are illegal. We're sorry, but there it is.
Well, I think we can go back to a landmark Supreme Court ruling that I write about in the first chapter of the book. And the book's first chapter is These Children Are Blameless. And that comes from a 1982 Supreme Court case called Plyler v. Doe. And Justice William Brennan wrote for the majority, and his major point was that it is the federal government's responsibility to enforce our immigration laws. And this is back in the 80s, this is 30 years ago. And he says they clearly are not doing their job. There are millions of unauthorized people living in the United States. But the second point he makes is that the children that were brought here had no agency in that decision. And so they are blameless. And then later on in the opinion, he argues that it is in the common good of this nation that we educate all children, because if we don't, these undocumented children will be forced into a permanent underclass. So I argue that in the book that the DREAM Act is nothing more than a straightforward application of Plata Vido to these children when they turn 18 and applying it to higher education. That's how I view the DREAM Act.
An argument is against it is that DREAM is unfair to native-born citizens or to naturalized citizens or to immigrants who are actively pursuing, whose parents or who themselves are actively pursuing citizenship. It's unfair to the native-born.
Well, and I would simply go back to the issue that they're blameless. These young people find them in a situation that when they turn 18, all of a sudden they're criminals. And again, it was not of their making. They did not make the decision to come here, but they are here. They're not going to be deported, and so it is in our common interest to see that they're educated, they get good jobs, they buy more, they pay more taxes, and they fully participate in our society. And that is the thrust of my book. That is in our common good and in our interest to do this.
DREAM, its critics say, is one more incentive for undocumented, for illegal immigrants to continue to enter the United States. That it is a perk, a benefit that makes a legal entry into the United States or entry into the United States all the more enticing.
I have interviewed or received biographies on 50 young people in writing this book. I did research on the Hispanic community in Northwest Arkansas starting in 2007. I've interviewed hundreds of people, and not one mentioned an educational benefit for coming to the United States. They have come here for the economic opportunities here. They've come here to avoid a civil war. They've come here to avoid an abusive husband. And they've come here to seek medical care. One of the major motivations is to reunite their families. That's why they're coming here. But not one person, and the national data I think would support this, have come here for an educational benefit. And think of it. They're coming here when they're 3, 4, or 5 years of age. Higher education's over a decade away. I mean, that is, it doesn't fit logic, I don't think.
Once here, would they remain?
Actually, it's kind of interesting, and I profile 2 young people, Zesna.
In other words, would we reap the societal benefits, the economic benefits of having them remain in the United States once educated here?
Oh, certainly we do. We now have a new policy called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Zesna, who I profile in the book, has just been awarded DACA. So she now has a Social Security number, and she now has a work permit. And she's a senior at the university, and she's a journalist, by the way, journalism major. So yes, she's going to have a job. She's going to have a Social Security number. She's going to earn more, and she's going to be paying into Medicare, Social Security, federal, state, and local taxes as a result of a change in policy at the federal level.
DREAM do you see DREAM as of a piece with a larger immigration?
It has to be. We are going to have comprehensive immigration reform, I would think maybe in August or September. And George Bush has a new book out called Jeb Bush, has a new book out called Immigration Wars. And in that book, he provides a blueprint for immigration reform. And I think it is a first step in a civic debate that we desperately need in this country, not only about immigration, but other issues as well. But he provides, I think, an important public service. He provides a blueprint for discussion. And Jeb Bush strongly supports the DREAM Act. and in part because he had a lot of experience with them in the state of Florida. And he understands their importance and their contributions to that state economy. And the same thing's true in the state of Arkansas.
It can't. Of course, the times are changing, but it's had no. It can't. It has not yet gone the distance in Congress.
No, but we have the Group of 8 in the Senate, and we have Boehner in the House, who is in support of the changes that are leaking out of the Group of 8. And part of that will be path to citizenship over a very long period of time, about a 10 or 12 or 13-year period. Eventually a path to citizenship for these undocumented children and young adults.
I think, a dozen states have acted independently of Washington.
Right, well, we have gridlock in D.C. Approval rating of Congress, most of last year was in the single digits. So state legislators have taken over. And we have 12 states that have DREAM Act laws, but we also have 4 additional states that provide the same benefit, but they've done it through policy rather than law.
Well, and there's opposition even then that, in Arkansas, Governor Beebe has signaled grave reservations about it because he said the application of DREAM would collide with federal statutes and leave the whole program in limbo.
Well, I met with the governor.
Leaving a question mark.
Yeah, well, I met with the governor yesterday, and he was very gracious to make time in his schedule.
I should add here, we're taping on March the 20th.
Okay.
So,
yeah. And I think he may have softened his position. I don't know if he's going to sign the bill or not, but he is very, very sympathetic to the plight of these young people, and he understands the challenges they face. And he certainly would prefer federal law, but I'm hopeful that he'll sign a bill if it lands on his desk.
Well, you've got to get a bill to his desk first.
Yes, I'm new at this, and you could smell a lot of sausage being made at the Capitol yesterday. I guess that's the best way to describe it.
The previous gubernatorial administration was an enthusiastic supporter of DREAM, and Senator Elliott and her colleague, her Republican colleague, Mr. Key of Mountain Home, are the sponsors this go around. Still, the sledding is bound to be pretty rough.
Well, I met with Joyce yesterday. I met with Mr. Keyes yesterday, and they're working very hard on this issue. So again, I don't really have a lot of insight into making it this legislation and passing it, other than knowing that a lot of discussion's going on.
Well, you note in your book, you write at one point in the book, landmark social legislation occurs at the confluence of economic, social, and political factors. I put the political in italic. There seems to be some change, some shifts, certainly on the right of the spectrum.
Well, there's a fight going on the Republican Party, and the Republican National Committee published a report, a fact-finding report, just 2 days ago. And basically, they say that if they want to win nationally, then they're going to have a tent that welcomes the entire spectrum of our society. And of course, there is some controversy within the party, but either the Republican Party takes a different approach towards immigrants and immigration, they're going to have difficulty at the national level competing, period. And I think we all know that the Hispanic and the Asian vote that went overwhelmingly to Obama was a major reason he was reelected.
The 12 elections, you write, changed the playing field.
Absolutely. And
as reflected in the GOP study.
In the GOP study, they said, the quote I take away from the USA Today, which came with the room in my hotel, basically said the Republican Party has become the party of stuffy old white men. And so Republican on a national level this last election cycle lost the women, lost the youth, lost the Asian, and lost the Hispanic votes overwhelmingly. And if you look at the demographic reality of this society, I don't think most Americans realize that by the beginning of next decade, majority of our children will be African American, Hispanic, and Asian. And by the next decade, the majority of Americans will be from minorities, African American, Hispanic, and Asian.
Majority minority, I think it's.
Majority minority, yeah.
Yeah.
And that we have 40 million immigrants that live in this nation. And when you add the 36 million children who have at least one foreign-born child, one foreign-born parent, 1 out of every 4 Americans is either a first or second generation immigrant. So we're changing. And our political institutions must change as well.
The demographers seem to suggest that the pace is faster than they had anticipated, even when they made.
Well, we saw a tremendous decline in fertility because of the Great Recession. And immigrant women in particular reduced the number of children, had fewer children. So I was predicting just 6 months ago that we would become a minority among children by the end of this decade. Well, I've put it out. I'm a demographer, so it's probably a little bit into the next decade. But within a decade, we're going to see this change.
Well, I note too that that Texas is among the dozen states that have acted. Now you have to its west, Arizona has not, and continues to resist, evidently, again, quite vociferously. Texas, however, sees things a little differently.
One, because it's likely to be a blue state by 2000.
Demography is at work there.
Yeah, either by 2016 or 2020. And there are people already at work in Texas to see that it becomes a blue state by 2016. They have a large Hispanic population. They not only provide in-state tuition, they provide state support for undocumented youth within the state because they recognize the vital role that that market plays in their economy. In Arkansas, Asian and Hispanics pump in almost $4 billion into our economy. Their social services cost about $500 million. So it's about a 7-to-1 cost-benefit ratio in terms of the services we provide and the economic benefits we reap. Nationally, the Hispanic market is $1 trillion in the U.S. If they were an economy unto themselves, they would be the 14th largest economy in the world. Asian immigrants pump about $500 billion into our economy per year. So they're a vital economic force in the society, and we need to, I think, appreciate that.
Do you think that if the immigration issue was shifted from south to north, in other words, if Mexico was incredibly prosperous and Canada exceptionally poverty-stricken, and the influx of immigrants was coming from the north rather than from the south, that the debate would be quite as fevered?
In other words, if it was white Canadian,
exactly, English speaking.
English speaking. Well, what about the French?
Well, I mean, there are a few Quebecers.
Yeah. Okay. Probably not. But I think most Americans don't appreciate that our southern border is secure. There are more people leaving the United States across our southern border than are arriving, and that. The safest communities we have in the United States are on the U.S. side of the U.S.-Mexican border. So our borders are secure. There are still approximately 100,000 people coming across, but our border security has gotten so much better, and the strategies they're using in enforcement have gotten so much so much more effective that my point is that illegal immigration is no longer the issue. The issue is what we're going to do with 11 million undocumented and unauthorized people that are already here, who have been here on average for over 10 years.
Does that, in your judgment, give the lie to the argument by opponents that we simply cannot accommodate the social services network, the commercial network, our economy cannot adequately incorporate 11 million?
Yeah. Well, we already have. And if you look at Arkansas, the taxes that immigrants pay, in 2007, there's a wonderful new study by the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation on Arkansas's immigrants. They did the original study in 2007, and they simply updated it in 2013. They're looking at our Marshallese residents up in northwest Arkansas this time around. And what they show is that it's about $127 per immigrant in the state of Arkansas is, if you want to look at it in terms of the cost of the state. When you look at cost of education and the other services minus the tax revenue. So it's a very, very small percentage of a minuscule part of our state budget. And we reap the benefits of a 7-to-1 cost-benefit ratio in terms of their spending and their driving our economy.
We have been here before in our history, have we not? We had the yellow peril of Chinese immigrants. We had no Irish need apply.
Right. We
had the Kaiser's hordes with Germans. And I guess so many ethnic, other than the English, so many identifiable ethnic groups encountered significant opposition, discrimination when they arrived. That perhaps we shouldn't be terribly surprised that Latino Hispanic immigrants, legal or not, face some of those same issues.
Well, we seem to have a...
Is the issue us, by the way?
Yeah.
Meaning Caucasian, third or fourth, fifth, sixth generation Caucasian American.
The kind of the irony, or maybe we have this constitutional right, if you're the preceding immigration wave, then you get to dump all over the newest wave of immigrants. So I think that's probably what's going on. But as we talked about before the camera rolled, some of the hate mail I've gotten been by people like O'Malley. That's not the name, but and the Irish were not welcomed in the society in the 19th century, and or the 20th. And you and I are probably pretty close to the same age. You remember when John F. Kennedy was elected president, and what a breakthrough that was for Irish Americans. And we already have 2 governors that are from Asia, second-generation Asians. So we're seeing Hispanics move into our important political offices. And so if I was going to predict anything, the assimilation of this latest wave of immigrants is probably going to be significantly faster than the third wave, which was dominated by Eastern and Southern Europeans and Asian immigrants. In fact, there's a new report out by the Pew Research Center looking at second-generation immigrants, and they're doing remarkably well. Whether we look at where they live in the second generation, their educational levels, their movement into the professions, their incomes, their identity, about a third of them view themselves in the second generation as solely Americans. The rest think of themselves as Guatemalan American or Chinese American. They're intermarrying at a very high rate. 26% of all Hispanics marry outside the group in the second generation, 23% of Asians. And so we are in a time in our history where we're going through this profound demographic change. And many Americans are threatened by it. And I would argue all we have to do is look to our history to find that we have nothing to fear. This is the great American experiment. We are the envy of the world. And one reason is we take people from all over the world, we use their skills, we use their talents, we selectively borrow those parts of their cultures which fit in, we Americanize it, and it becomes part of us. And we're simply continuing that long tradition.
Well, that tradition seems to be challenged on many fronts, and perhaps the gentleman who now occupies the White House, Barack Hussein Obama, a man of color with a mysterious middle name, seems to evoke in so many people he embodies the other that so many of us are concerned about. We don't understand, we fear, and you're saying take it easy.
Yes, I would take it. We've done this 4 times before. We've had 4 major waves of immigration, and we're getting good at it. Take a look at language, which seems to be one of the central issues raised by the anti-immigration groups. If we compare Hispanics and Asians to Italians and Greeks and Eastern Europeans, they're learning English at a far faster rate than the third wave. In the second generation, 85% of all immigrants either speak only English or they speak English with high proficiency. So this idea that we're going to have 2 cultures, one Spanish or one Chinese and one English, is not the truth. The truth being these people came here for the economic opportunities here, they embrace our values, and they're going to be assimilated very quickly. And we're going to be a very different nation. We're reinventing what it means to be an American, but that's not a bad thing. One thing I point out in the book is we have this remarkable geography. We span a continent. And our west coast ties us to the Pacific Rim economies. We have these historical ties to Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Imagine the economic value of having someone who speaks the language, has family and kin ties to a country where we're trying to have an economic relationship, and we can go in and have an advantage that other people don't have, other business people in the world don't have. So I view this as an asset. I see this as something that adds value to the society.
The book is Right to Dream. The author is Dr. Bill Schwab, and we thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Steve.
Bill Schwab,
Appreciate
thank you.
Yeah.
You bet. And we'll see you next time.